All right, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 22 of the IndieVerse. If you can hear us coming in loud and clear, please let us know in the chat. That would be super helpful. My name's Keelan Rivers. Again, this is the IndieVerse, where we talk about things, all things self-publishing, indie publishing, and that whole realm. And today I'm joined by Alex. And Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a brief introduction to yourself.
Okay, I'm Alex G. Zarate. I'm an author, an artist, and a photographer. I've got a few books published, and I like posting a lot of my photography on Instagram.
And everybody, you can follow Alex on all of his social media and Instagram. It's all linked down in the description box below. So make sure you go ahead and click on all of those links and follow Alex where you can. So on today's episode of the IndieVerse, what we typically do is I'll go through the questions that I have for Alex, and for anybody who's watching live right now, if you have any questions as we're going through, please drop them in the chat, and then we'll get to all of those at the end. But the first question I have for you, Alex, is just tell us, it's a question that I typically ask everybody who comes on the IndieVerse, and it's to tell us a little bit about you and your writing journey. Like, what is, if I don't really have a better way to put it, but what is your writing origin story? How did you get started in writing and get to where you are today?
Well, I've always been somewhat interested in writing. I did it as a child. However, the older you get, the more people frown upon it. And sometime around high school and college, it was just too much negativity, too many people just kind of downplaying it. So I stopped, and I decided, okay, nobody wants me to do this. I'm just gonna, go along to get along. And I waited more than 10 years before I started writing again. And that was because I saw a promotion for Nanowrimo. And I kind of figured, okay, well, I still have this thought in my head of one day being a writer. So I decided to go ahead and, I'll accept the challenge. I'll write for a month. And at the end of the month, if I still feel like doing it, I'll know that I can continue. And if I realize, okay, I can't do anything here, this is just beyond me, and everybody was right, I figured, okay, then I'll give it up. And after I finished that month, it was like, the muse was there, the passion was there, and I was like, why did I give this up in the first place? Everybody who said I shouldn't do it were idiots. I should have just continued and totally ignored them and just followed my passion, because I'd have 10 years more of writing behind me instead of starting back and having to relearn a craft I had already had under my belt. So I've been writing ever since.
That's such an interesting story. I feel like when, I've had the opportunity to talk to lots of folks like yourself through the IndieVerse. And so some people start writing when they're older, or some people start writing when they're younger, or whenever they find writing in life. But it's interesting to hear that you kind of drifted away from it and then came back, and through NaNoWriMo. So a little bit of a follow-up question to that, I didn't send your way, but with regards to NaNoWriMo, is that something that you now actively participate in every year, or is it hit and miss for you?
I kind of use it as a means of doing a first draft for the next book I'm doing. So, from the time I started till today, every year I just, go in there and just, challenge is no longer difficult, because once you start getting to the point where you're creating something on a regular basis, the words flow a lot easier. You just kind of have to, stop editing yourself, because your goal is to produce the work more than produce perfect work. So when I sit down at, every November, I just start from day one and just, let the ideas come, let the story happen, and follow through to the end.
That's awesome that you got back into it through NaNoWriMo, and now that's a regular thing that continues. I love that. So at what point, I suppose, was it at kind of during that NaNoWriMo where you're like, oh, I want to do this more professionally, or was there another point in that journey where you were like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do.
I always wanted to, write a book and to do more than just short stories or little ideas. But up until doing NaNoWriMo, and I finally realized I can actually write an entire book. And I realized I actually have the chance to craft the story and create backgrounds and develop characters. So I started looking into it more, and the first draft you start off and it's like it almost seems like an outline, even though it's 50,000 words and you're done. It's just it gives you the skeleton to build off of, and then by the time you're completed with it, it's like you flesh out all the characters, you create the story, you have everything in place. And I just I wanted to do it for so long, and up until that point, I never really believed it would happen. And all it took was just tell yourself, just put everything into it. The worst you can do is fail. If you fail it, now you shouldn't have started it. But when you succeed, then you realize that was part of your journey, your passion. And that's what everybody wants to do. And until you follow your passion, you never know if it's going to lead to something more.
That's awesome. And it's just that's so cool to hear that it was NaNoWriMo that like really kicked that off. So you also pursue quite a few like other creative endeavors. So you're an artist, photographer. Tell us a little bit about those, because I mean, one of the things that we try to do on the IndieVerse is get like a holistic picture of who the person is and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool. You do all those other things. So I'd love to hear about it a little bit.
Well, when I gave up my writing, I still had this creative, drive that was pulling me forward. So I kept looking for other ways of doing it. And from years before, I liked doing drawings and stuff. So I started pursuing graphic arts and different types of drawing and painting and multimedia things. I did sculpture for a while, pottery even. And then somewhere along the line, I needed something for a screen image, and I wanted to find a sunset. And everywhere I looked to find one, everything had a big copyright, logo or something embedded into it. So okay, it kind of distracts from it. And I kept thinking, I already have a camera, and at this point I'm living in California, so it's like there are beautiful sunsets everywhere. So what am I doing, getting ready to pay for something when I can just look outside and just click and I have it. So at that point I start going outside, and I took pictures at the beach, took pictures when I was hiking. I go out on a regular basis and take pictures. And before you know it, I started realizing, hey, this is kind of another passion of mine. I like going out there and seeing the world and finding new ways of looking at something everyone often takes for granted.
For sure. And I think that's, one of the most beautiful things about photography is it, like, at least for me, looking at a beautiful photo or even taking a photo, it makes you pause a little bit and like really admire. So again, follow-up question that I hadn't sent, but I'm going to ask. So do you ever find yourself using like one creative outlet as a like break from another like, because writing obviously is so intense, and I'm sure lots of folks in the chat will agree with me that it is intense. Do you ever find yourself like, do you use art and photography as kind of a break from writing, or is it all equal weight for you?
They're kind of complementary, but they become excuses if you really want them. Because sometimes, for people who've been writing for a long time, as soon as you start working, your mind, because it becomes uncomfortable and you're like, oh, I really want to make good, you start thinking, I haven't finished doing the laundry. I haven't finished, doing the dishes. I really should take out the trash. Just something to pull you away from it. But when you have all these other, artistic, creative ideas that you follow on a regular basis, a lot of times I just use it as a means of, okay, I want to write and I really like this chapter. Let me see if I can go find a good graphic for the chapter, or let me brainstorm some ideas as to what this chapter could look like and maybe use it as the cover image of the book, or or just kind of, oh, the characters are going outside, they're going on a hike or field trip, or the kids outside playing, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out, take a walk, and take some pictures and start capturing some of these images and using them as inspiration for bringing the story back. And they are still kind of like little procrastination excuses, but I use them to complement one another so I can go back to the writing and have even more available to me when I go back to it. Kind of like adding music for different scenes so that you can feel the inspiration and kind of the drive to keep on going.
I love that, how you use it to like complement and overlap. And I actually think that answers one of my questions that I had for you, because there's so much overlap between these spaces. So that's really interesting. I'm just going to take this opportunity. I see some questions coming in the chat. We're going to get to all the questions at the end. So if you do have any as we're talking, please drop them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. So I guess a little bit of a follow-up, and it's kind of along the same like vein, like many writers like you have like other creative endeavors that they pursue. How do you balance that time-wise? Do you like schedule time for writing and schedule time for photography, or is it more organic, I suppose? Like I'm curious how you go about like managing all of those different areas.
I try to schedule my writing. A lot of times I try to make sure I put some time in the morning and some time at night, especially at night, because that's when things quiet down everywhere, and that's when less notifications, less interruptions, so you can actually go ahead and do more of it. For the photography and for the art, it's almost an organic process. It's like it's nice outside, the sun is out, there's or you can see there's clouds, but you can see there's like these billowing clouds or a lot of color coming across, so you're like, oh, I want to go out there and get some pictures, find some nice locations. So you make an excuse to get out there and do that. For the drawing, that has to be an organic process. A lot of times I want to do more, but my writing is what I'm trying to push right now. I'm trying to get my books written, get the stories out, move towards publication every time I write a new book. So art and the graphic portion of it, that kind of takes a little sidestep to the writing each time. Photography is easier, but the writing always takes priority.
Nice. And so you mentioned in that you enjoy writing in the evenings. I think like there's a lot of morning versus night people, all those different things. Could you walk us through? I'm just so curious, and I am realizing I should ask more people this. Like, could you walk us through a little bit, like what your writing routine looks like, or do you have a particular routine, or is there a particular time? I just realized I don't ask enough people that, and I think it's such an interesting, like it's interesting to hear other people's methods.
For me, usually it's at the end of the day, maybe a couple hours before it's time to go to bed, which I usually go a couple hours after. But usually I just set everything up. I have multiple screens on my computer, so I have one screen with my document, the other one with maybe the web browser where I can look for images or bring up quotes if it's a chapter. I like to put certain quotes at the beginning of every chapter. And another one that I have with music. And when I'm writing, I like to have just music without words, so I can just follow the sound. It's editing that I usually have. I select genres, and I can select different types of music for the different moods of each chapter. But once I have all that in place, I just start the music, bring up the browser, and then start looking over what I put beforehand, and then just jump into the next part of the story and see where the characters take me.
That's awesome. I also enjoy very much writing to music, especially instrumental music. I can't really write to words. It my mind, I don't know, wanders. So I guess and you touched on this a little bit earlier. Do you ever find inspiration for your writing through your art and photography? Like, have you ever seen something and kind of thought to yourself, wow, this like has inspired a story idea or is a really cool story idea? I'm just curious because I feel like all like especially photography is so visual and could be so inspiring. And
Yeah, a lot of times it's kind of like a picture's worth 1,000 words. When you're going out and you're taking pictures of either the sky or the clouds, or I like to take landscape pictures. So I see the mountains and I can see people hiking sometimes, or people just taking walks out, and it's just like, what's the story behind this? What brings everybody out here? Is it someone trying to get away from their day, from their life, or is this like their passion? Do they want to be out there in the outdoors? Do they love this? Being out in the sun, being out in part of nature. It seems like there's stories everywhere you go, and every time I go out there and take pictures, I'm capturing these things, and then I'm looking back and starting to analyze, like, wow, this really looks great in this corner, and this part over here could be its own story idea. And it just it draws you in, so you can always kind of start looking into it and start thinking, what more could this image tell. And several times it's actually prompted to create entire chapters in some of the stories I've written.
that's so cool that they're kind of used like prompts. So I'm curious, like when you take a look at the photos or the art or whatever it may be, are you like, would you consider yourself a pantser or a plotter when it comes to your stories? I'm just curious as to whether or not like.
I consider myself a pantser.
Okay.
However, I plan an awful lot when I'm working on a new story. It doesn't always follow through, because like I can create an
Hmm.
outline and say, I start, and oh, this would be a really great idea for a story, and I set up all the chapter ideas and where the story is going to go. And then I go back and I start thinking, okay, well, if this happens, then let me try to create a beat sheet to see where the story is going to happen. And then I go back and I start, okay, let me start writing it, and my characters decide to go in a different direction. So a lot of times, chapters, entire, separate little sub stories that I thought were going to happen don't happen at all, because
Hmm.
my characters went a different way, and I also like, wow, this is even better. The organic movement of where these characters were going is even better than the outline I had in mind, or the beats that I thought were going to work best for it. So although I do plan, it could be kind of like a plotter mindset when I'm actually writing, that it's all pantsing.
That's so interesting. And I've met several other folks like that who plan and then the characters will just have their own way. Um, I also find it's so fascinating how, because like I experience this too, what you think is going to happen in your head and then it comes out on the page and you're like, well, that's totally different, but it's great, but it's totally different. Um, so I mean, I think a lot of like different writers are really interested in pursuing other creative endeavors. And it's like, I know we've talked a lot about how kind of your photography and art overlaps with your writing and inspires that a little bit. So, for anybody else who would want to get started in kind of things outside of writing, photography, art, like, would you have any advice for those folks and how they could get started in those areas?
For photography, the first thing I would say is just, if you have I use my phone a lot. Your phone actually picks up things that a regular professional camera does not, because a lot of times a regular camera will actually diffuse some of the colors, and then you have to go back and
Hmm.
put them back in. Once you download them into your computer, your phone almost always will deepen the colors and make it look closer to what you're actually seeing. So I would always say, if you want to pursue photography, just go out there and start lining up pictures, and just looking through your phone to see what it is that's out there, and then you capture it, and then you can actually zoom in and start seeing what looks best, what looks interesting, and then go back and start capturing them again. You can zoom in, just go down close to flowers, and you know out here there's lizards and stuff, so you can actually see these things happening and capture them, and then just build on it. The more pictures you take, it's like anything else. It's the better you'll get.
That's
Same thing.
awesome.
Same thing
Uh,
with art. You pursue it and just there's tutorials everywhere online. Just go into YouTube, go to Google, just find something. And you don't have to pay for classes. Just go online and find people who have already posted tutorials, and everything from line drawing to painting to sculpture or graphic arts, Photoshop. I found them all over the years, and there's so many more today.
Yeah, online resources. I mean, even for writing, there's so much free stuff online. It's absolutely incredible. I guess I have a little bit of a follow-up. Do you have any like favorite like spots you like to go to find things about writing or whatever it may be? Do you prefer video or like
Usually video.
okay.
I go to YouTube 9 times out of 10, just because anything that you search on there looking for some author talking about the way they, like set up Scrivener or things like that, you'll have 100 different results, and you can just sit there and whoever describes it in a way that you can personally follow is always the best, and you can just go through from one to the other, and it works out. It's one of the better platforms, I think. It has the most users.
Gosh, Scrivener is one I will still I don't use Scrivener. It's so intimidating to me. Do you use Scrivener?
I use it when I'm organizing the novel.
Okay.
A lot of the best part of Scrivener is you can take scenes and jump them around very easily. Whereas in Word, you have to literally copy paste to move them from one section to another one. I write in Word, most of the time, but Scrivener is where I organize the novel. And sometimes I'm writing a scene, and it's very good. I like it, except then I realize the description of what's happening here hasn't happened, in the scene before. So okay, I have to move this scene over and then reword it a little bit, and Scrivener just does that effortlessly. It's just one of the best apps for that. The only problem I see with Scrivener is it has so many features. That's the one drawback. It would be nice if they simplified it and then provided the features under the surface. But it's like Photoshop. A lot of people are afraid of Photoshop because when you first open it, you have 50 tools all around you, and you have no clue what to do with any of them. And unless you've been using it for years, you won't really know where to start. It's like, okay, how do I draw a circle, or how do I shade something in? And you don't understand how the process goes. Scrivener is like that. It's got so many available tools. It doesn't quite give you something for a very new person to come in and use it for the first time.
Like a Scrivener Lite or something
like
that.
Or at least have a different mode where you can like switch it from beginner to intermediate to advanced, and provide more tools with each level, and you can actually just dial it down depending on what point you're at. Because a lot of people I know just stick to the basics on it and just move things around and use it for a word processor.
I would love that so much, because I think the reason I haven't gotten Scrivener is because it looks so intimidating. And you're right about tools like Photoshop. Like, I've been using Photoshop for years, and while I'm not intimidated by it, there's some things on Photoshop like I definitely don't know what they are even. So yeah. That's so interesting that Scrivener, that's a good comparison, and also makes me a little less scared of Scrivener. So I might have to go in and get a subscription. So I have 3 questions left, but I'm just going to remind everybody watching right now, because I see there are folks watching live. If you do have any questions, please drop them in the chat. So my next question is, outside of writing, do you have a favorite medium of art?
Well, outside of writing, I would probably say photography.
Okay,
just because cool. I like to go for walks, and almost every day I go out with a camera in hand, so I can, a few times I've gone out there and look up, and there's a hawk up there, and I zoom in as much as I can, taking pictures, or I'm going around and I see there's a different scenes, different views. Sometimes as the sun's going down, you see these big bright colors flashing across the sky, and it's a really great thing when you see that and you realize it's only going to be there for a few seconds.
Hmm.
So I'm just standing there, enjoying that and taking picture after picture, and knowing it's like, wow, I'm going to be able to have this, keep it, and I can share it with other people. And it's like one of those experiences that a lot of times you say, oh, you should have seen the colors, and you should have seen the clouds, and it was like something out of a movie, and people hear that and like, oh, hey, great, did you take a picture? And oh no.
Yeah.
So for me, going out there and taking pictures, that's become a second passion, next to writing, that I just find myself following every day.
That's amazing. And just a reminder for everybody watching right now or watching in the future on the replay, links to Alex's Instagram are down in the description box below. So make sure you go check out his Instagram. So obviously you're focusing very much on your writing right now. That is like the number one. So I was curious, it's actually a two-part question because someone, a friend of mine, Eva, typically asks this question, and I don't think she's here today, so I'm going to ask it too because I think it's a great question. So first of all, tell us a little bit about what you're writing and working on now. And second of all, if you could recommend one of your books for somebody to go out and purchase, which one would it be?
Okay, the one I'm working on right now is Reflections in Darkness. It's a continuation of the urban fantasy novels I've been writing. A couple of friends have called it supernatural suspense, because it has so many more elements than just urban fantasy does. It's becoming one of my favorite books that I'm putting out, just because so much happens in it and so many new characters introduced. I wasn't sure I could balance it, and once it was completed, I was excited to finish, working all the little kinks out of the process. I'm in the end process right now. I'm doing the chapter quotes, graphic illustrations, and tweaking the cover design just a little bit. So that I want to get out before the year is over. So in the next week or so, I want it to be available. And that's just Reflections of Darkness. The other one I would like, that I recommend to people, is Ripples of Mind. And that was the second urban fantasy book I wrote. And that one I was not too sure about when I first started writing it, just because I had the idea in mind. I knew what I wanted to say with it. And then by the time I was halfway through it, the story itself had grabbed me. And I was like, oh, I love this part in this section. So I followed it through, and it became one of my favorite books. That one and the one that followed ended up being part of what develops the main character, from someone who's just learning what's going on to the actual protagonist, the heroes of the story. And yeah, that book I definitely would recommend anyone to pick up.
I am
Ripples of Mind.
just linking it right now. Here we go. So there we go. For anybody who is watching and who's interested in the chat, this is where you can find the book. Just right there. So just went ahead and dropped it in there. Okay, Alex. And so I have one last question, and I ask this at the end of all of the IndieVerse interviews, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat. I see one so far. If anybody else has any questions, let us know. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice the moment before you hit publish on your first book, what would it be and why?
It would be to edit again and to look over the cover design, because those two are the ones that I've had to go back multiple times, because I do my own covers and I do all my artwork. And when I first started, I had friends help me with the editing, and it didn't quite click until after the first two books how important it is to get a professional editor and to actually look critically at the cover and the images. So it's kind of like, if I could go back, I would immediately say, just look over your book one more time. And something I tell people on a regular basis is read your book out loud. Because when you first read it, it's in your head and it sounds perfect because it's in your head. But when you're actually reading it out loud, and I picked this up from picking up audiobooks, it sounds so much different, and the words actually start to develop their own definition. So it's not the same as the phrasing on the page looks okay. When you speak it out loud, you can find errors so quickly that you don't see if you're just looking at, oh, that sounds great. The sentences make the topic I'm talking about, and it brings everything to light. But then when you say it out loud, it's like, oh, that makes no sense. You have to read it out loud. Always do that. Always go back, just do a little bit of edits until you can go through it all. And it's like, okay, it sounds perfect to me. Now you have a professional editor. Go back and see what you missed. Because being the author, you will always miss something because you go through it so many times. After a while, you don't even see the words anymore. You just start a chapter, and the images come alive in your head, and immediately your thought is in the story and not into the words, and dissecting everything you put down. Does this convey what I want or not? You're just seeing the story in your head, especially after you've gone over it 50, 100 times. So an editor is always the best way to go. No matter how great a writer you are, you need someone who is not you to scrutinize your writing professionally.
That is such a great piece of advice. And I think it's one that maybe perhaps we forget. And yeah, that's a really great piece of advice, especially the reading out loud part. Someone gave me that piece of advice once, and I was like, I had never thought to do that before. Like, I don't know why it didn't cross my mind, but it was a great piece of advice, and it really, really helps. So thank you so much for sharing that. For anybody watching right now, because I do still see people are watching, if you have any questions for Alex, let us know in the chat. But I'm going to go to the question that Nicole asked earlier on. And so Nicole's asking whether or not, Alex, you ever are a NaNoWriMo. So for anybody who's watching that might not know, a NaNoWriMo is somebody who writes 50,000 words in the month of NaNoWriMo, but it's not on a new project. It's on an existing project, I believe. Someone correct me in the chat if I'm wrong on that definition. Or are you able to write like 50K in a new novel?
I have done both. I've actually had a existing novel that I tried to write on my own and failed, and was ready to toss aside. And then when NaNoWriMo came around, I decided, okay, I'm gonna put this in the front. I know what I want to say, and then I just go in there. And a lot of times it's easier. The only time it gets a little harder is when you have a set type of story you want to tell, and as a pantser, that kind of works against what you want, because you want to just follow the story and let it see where it leads you. But for the most part, when I took that up, it's like I have the idea, I have the story. It's pre-written in a very rough draft, so I go back and use NaNoWriMo to iron everything out and just write the story from beginning to end, so I'll have it. And that's something else I like to promote and tell people all the time when they're beginning to write, is finish every story that you start writing. Don't begin writing it and then after 5 or 6 chapters decide, I really don't feel that great about the story anymore. I'm going to stop writing and start something totally new. And it's like, no, don't do that. You had an interest for this story, you really wanted it. See it all the way through to the end. Once you get to the end, if it really is something that has an option to grow, you can work on it. You can't edit it if it's not finished. Because if you spend your time editing the first chapter, you'll never finish, because it's too easy to go back and say, I can say this better, I can phrase this better, and just spend all your time reworking page 1, chapter 1, sentence 1. And then, well, if you're writing 200, 300 page book of some kind, you'll never get beyond page 1.
Yeah.
So you have to get through it all, finish the entire story, and then go back, and then you can fix it and edit it and work on it. Otherwise, nothing will ever get done. That was one of the things I realized that I did when I first thought about writing before I had to give it up. And it was because I wrote and as just a hobby, and I was, I have a great idea for a story, and I start writing and I just put it aside. And then the next day I have another idea, but I
Mhm.
never finished the one before. It wasn't until I came back to it and I realized, yeah, I really want to finish a book, and NaNoWriMo has presented this challenge, and I, went into it and decided I'm gonna try to get to the end, and it made all the difference.
That's so I love hearing that just because it's something that I need to hear because I recall me too when I was, um, not so much doing this as like a business, but more of a hobby. I would start so many projects, get like, yeah, like you said, like 6 chapters in, maybe get to like 20, 30,000 words. And
Mhm.
then it's maybe it wasn't because lack of interest in the project, but then I would start editing it. And like it just
Mhm.
became this vicious cycle of me not being able to finish any books. And then I don't know what it was. It just something clicked. And there was a weird phase though, because when I was younger, when I was like 13, 14, and when I was a teenager, I wrote my first like full length novel. It was never published or anything like that. It was awful. But that one I finished. But then I went through this odd phase where I couldn't finish anything. So that's really, really interesting to hear. Um,
Mhm.
so I did have one last question. That was a follow up to the Nano. Oh, yes. I was curious, what has been your like biggest word count in a month before? Like, have you ever done? I know some people do like double NaNoWriMos. Like, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, that is a whole lot. I'm not sure I could do that much. I think the most I've done has been just over 70,000 words.
That's
So,
crazy. That's a
mm,
huge amount of words. Um, I'm just going to do one last call out to see if there's any questions. But Alex, thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to turn it over to you quickly to say whatever you want to say, promote whatever you want to promote. And just a reminder, everybody, Alex's book, Ripples of Mind, is linked in the chat. So if that's something that interests you, this is the one that he recommends to go and grab first. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
okay, I would always recommend anyone to, just follow your creative passions. Everything that you have that you want to do, it takes a while to develop any kind of a craft. So when you first begin, you can't expect to, I'm gonna sit down and write, and I'll, write the great American novel, and I'll be able to retire and be happy. It's like, no, it's a process. It's kind of like, going to the gym to get strong, or learning a sport and getting better at it. You have to develop it. You have to become, more proficient in storytelling. And it's like anything else. The deeper you go, the more levels there are. When you first start, you're just writing a story idea, but the more times you do it, the more you realize there are characters that you develop. There are, scenes that you have to describe. There are situations that you have to make sure they're as involved as possible. Sometimes the bad guys, you have to make sure they're as real as possible. You don't want to make just a generic, he's the bad guy, he's trying to hurt this person, so you're going to go stop him. You have to actually think about, even if you don't put it on paper, you have to think, why is he doing this? Because, it's been said before, we are always the hero of our story. We think we're doing the right thing. And every time a villain is out there doing something, he's not doing it because he wants to be villainous. He's doing it because he's thinking, what I want to have happen, the result is worth it, because, this is going to happen and this is the best thing. And I'm not going to listen to anybody telling me different, even though he's thinking, okay, I'm going to kill this, town of people or whatever. I'm going to attack this family. It's his mindset thinking this is the right thing. And it's the hero's job to see it from the opposite point and say, okay, I'm here to save lives. I'm here to preserve it. No matter what he's doing, I have to be in his way. And that's where the two, conflicts always take place. So always, you know, go into your story, make it as real as possible, find out who your characters are. And there have been people who say, interview your characters, even if it's in your head, just say, okay, who are you? Where did you come from? How were you raised? And, what were your interests? What brought you to this point in your life? And then you jump in the story, and here you are in the middle of this big scene, and now you know why. that scene is taking place, why one person is fighting so hard against this one, when one is trying to save lives, the other one's trying to take it. So it's everyone is a hero of their own story. So that's one of the biggest things I say. The other is always just, like I said, follow your passions. Some people, they like writing, others, like singing, like, crafting, sculptures and doing all kinds of things. Whatever it is, there are outlets out there. All we have to do is just find them and follow them.
Thank you so much, Alex, for those words. And I think sometimes we all just need to hear that someone encouraging us to follow our passion. So thank you very much for that. And just really quickly, Devin loves the hat. Devin is absolutely wonderful. So Devin and everybody here today who came to watch live, thank you so much for coming. And for anybody watching on the replay, thank you for joining us on episode 22 of the IndieVerse. And today we're actually doing a double feature. There's 2 IndieVerse episodes going up, so there's going to be one coming up very shortly. So if you want to stick around for that, that would be really awesome. Again, Alex, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Oh, thanks. I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody, and see you on the next episode.